Anyway, back to the Shattered Elbow. How did you incorporate that into your writing?
Well, what I did was I was working on a play called Mary Tammy Walker. Carl, who I worked with at Star Max Media, he asked for a series of plays like the High School the Musical. And I hadn't seen them yet, but I'd heard about them. So he asked me to watch them and see if I could write something that was that good for him. And I told him, yeah, I'll take a look at it. I watched it and I said, yeah, sure, I can write this, no problem. And he said, I want you to promise me you'll write something just as good as High School the Musical. And I said, no, I'm going to give you something much better. Because I really didn't think the writing there was very good because there was no real character growth or arc to these stories. I thought they were very frivolous stories where not much was really at stake in the story. So what I did was but one of the things that happened when I was going to write one of these stories, I shattered my elbow, before I wrote the story. And that experience was fresh in my mind, all the things that I went through from that experience. So what I did was I had a 13-year-old girl who's my heroine in the story, Mary Tammy Walker. I have her go through a lot of the same things that I went through with the Shattered Elbow, but I didn't make it the A-plot story because I knew it wasn't an important enough event. And you've got to distinguish that. Just because something happens in your life, and it might be the most important event in your life, it might not be the best thing to use as the A-plot. It might be a better B-plot or C or D-plot in the story. So I used it actually as the B-plot, where this is one of the things that's going wrong in her life and a series of bad things happening one after another to her. So I incorporated it in that. It's like, oh, this on top of everything else wrong in my life now too. But
Right.
It's interesting because I used that. It's funny because it's like okay, yeah, I shattered my elbow. It was a horrible experience, but you know what? I can use it in this play, so that makes it all better. It's funny because it actually picked up my spirits. It's like, okay, I'm going to use this shattered elbow to my advantage. I'm going to use it in my next play, and I'm going to write a good play, and it's something good's going to come out of my elbow being shattered. And that was the way I looked at it. It picked up my spirit. Feel better.
Yeah, hey, it goes to show you the power of positive
If life
thinking.
gives you lemons, make lemonade, right?
That's right. Well, when it comes to script writing, now with the writer, I'm sure we've all heard of the saying, you're only as good as your last one, right?
Yeah.
You always got something to prove.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You say more so in script writing than, say, an actor, where an actor can cruise by in reputation. But when it comes to writing and scripts, you got to come bring it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really the hardest of all. I look at a lot of actors out there, and it's like, once you've got a stick that works, like Tom Cruise, he's the good-looking, likable hero, and he plays pretty much that character in most of the stuff that he's in. He can do that over and over again. It's like John Wayne. He can play the cowboy. He can play the cop. He can get pretty close to the same performance each time and still make it work, still make a living at it. Actors can do that, but with writers, it's a different story. Nobody cares. This is the bottom line. Nobody goes to see a William Goldman movie. They go to see a good movie. You can't cruise on your reputation as a writer. I don't care if you're Joe Esterhaus or William Shakespeare. You've got to come up with a strong story that's well executed and with good, interesting characters, and you've got to do it each and every time. And the thing is you look at writers like Joe Ester, it's like, when was the last time we saw a movie out of him? And he's one of the best writers ever. It's like William Goldman. When was the last film we saw written by William Goldman lately? You know what I'm saying? They're not cranking them out one after another. No, for the writer, every time you have got to be on the money, and you just can't cruise on your reputation. I don't care how many Oscars you have, Hugos or Nobellas, because so much money is put into making a movie that they have to really have confidence in the project. This is an interesting story. The movie The Toy with Richard Pryor. It was funny because when they made that movie, they actually didn't think the movie would do that well. They thought it'd probably just about break even. And then it turned out to be one of the big hits of the year. And one of the reasons I think it worked was because, they said, okay, we're going to make, it's going to be a light little film, but we're going to make something that we're passionate about that we'd like to see, And they didn't think it would do that well, but guess what? If you really want to see it, there's a lot of other people that really want to see it too. Hey, and then they're like, oh my God, it's a hit. What did we do right? That wasn't supposed to happen.
Right. So when you're writing scripts, I mean, you use extremes. I mean, sometimes to break out of that box, you're only as good as your last script, but sometimes that script demands extremes. So when we talk extremes, give us some examples of extremes.
Well, an example of extremes I thought was a little project called Dumb or Dumber. And one of the reasons I like playing with extremes because it's the extreme situation, it's the extreme experience, that defines the limits of things, like the story of the man who put wax and feathers on his arms and learned to fly and flew too close to the sun. The wax melted and he fell to the ground and died. And the moral of that story is there are limits to things. We need to know what those limits are. And it's like a story like Dumb and Dumber. Okay, I don't know if you've seen that movie, but for those who haven't seen it, the plot line in a nutshell is Joe Bowers is an average guy who in an army experiment gets frozen. He's supposed to wake up a year later, and he ends up waking up 500 years later, and the dumb gene has completely taken over the planet. He was of average intelligence before. Now he's literally the smartest man on the planet, and he's not just he's way smarter than everyone else on the planet. The dumb people have taken over because they've outbred the smart people. So what happens is now that he's the smartest man on the planet, they have him try and figure out all the problems of their society. And it's a very it's a very funny story, but it's a story about the extreme situation. What if the dumb gene took over the planet? Let's run with that premise. And what if a guy from average intelligence woke up 500 years in the future and everyone was an idiot? But this is where I look for inspiration. What's the extreme? What's the limit of something?
Yeah, well, another one, we've mentioned this before, and maybe you can expand on it now, where the villains, the businessmen, they look somewhat like respectable citizens, but deep down underneath, they're not very good people. You like to use this.
Quality of evil.
Yes, you like to use that. Explain to the folks that are watching this, since we're talking screenwriting tips, a little bit of concept behind the banality of evil.
Okay, well, the idea of banality of evil is that someone who appears to be like a nice guy and a normal person, who doesn't come across as like Dr. Evil with the shaved head and the evil laugh and, always, comes across, someone who is a bad person but doesn't come across as a bad person. And a lot of people who look like decent people can engage in horrific, terrible acts. And this was proven in a study that they did where they had average people in society, in an experiment, shock someone to death. Or, when the authority figure tells them to kill this person, to shock them to death. They found that most people, average, decent, normal people will do this if the authority figure tells them to do this. And that's the interesting thing. I try to incorporate that into the story where I have people that you look at them and you're like, these aren't evil people. These look like normal, likable, decent people. But they're doing terrible, terrible things. And a lot of times they don't even realize what they're doing is evil. And they don't think of themselves as evil or bad people.